Okay, so let's talk about a taboo. Mentally ill people. You all know what happened during the Renaissance from the 14th until the 16th century here in Europe. People were executed for witchcraft. It was the witch hunt. Mentally ill people at that time were chained up, treated more as animals than as humans, crying out in pain, and they were placed on public display. And then in the 20th century we have all these methods that we know because of the films and because of the series, such as the dry shock, the wet shock, and even metronidazole. But what happened in the middle? Weren't there mentally sick people at that time? Of course there were. Some of them even were the main characters of novels, and you all know who I'm talking about, right? What happened in the middle is the age of Enlightenment, in which the attitude of Western populations towards mentally sick people radically changed. We had what we call the Great Confinement of insane people in the West. Mental illness came to be viewed as a disorder that required compassionate treatment and that it could enable the rehabilitation of the victim. This reminds us of Ivy and Brown's theory of the mobilization of empathy. This fundamental shift in public consciousness, it is the humanitarian Big Bang, as Michael Barnett describes. The first step of this humanitarian Big Bang was the mutual assistance between human beings. And then this led to a second step, the organized compassion in the 18th century, and this shift in the way that mentally ill people were perceived and treated. The initial management of insane people was to put them away from the rest of the population of the society in confinement with other antisocial kinds of people such as prostitutes, and into new institutions, which were the hospitals. This is the third step described by Michael Barnett of the humanitarian Big Bang, that society experienced a desire to go beyond relief and to attack the cause of suffering. There was a growing confidence in scientific knowledge and a belief that we as humans could change our condition of human beings. It was a time for charity to gain strength, what Foucault calls the modern era. Foucault, in his book Madness and Civilization, explains how in this point of history, under the supervision of medical doctors, people were confined. This means two things. First of all, that the old purpose of keeping the mentally ill people away from society was still kept, but that another new goal was added, which was that of curing the insane. The new trendy treatment in Europe was called moral treatment and was initiated independently by the French doctor Philippe Pinel and the English Quaker William Tuke. So let's talk about them. In 1792, Henri Pinel became the chief physician at the Bicêtre Hôpital near Paris, and before my arrival, all the inmates were chained in cell-like rooms with no ventilation. So in 1797, together with Poussin, the governor, we decided to abolish physical treatment and free all the mental patients from their chains. Patients were allowed to freely move in the hospital, and eventually the rooms became sunny and well ventilated. I thought that mental illnesses were actually the result of excessive exposure to social and psychological stresses. My reforms were very successful and they were copied and replicated in other hospitals. For example, La Salpêtrière, the female hospital for mentally sick people, also in Paris. Here you can see how the patients were so grateful that they were kissing my hands after freeing them from the chains. And my successor and student, John Esquirol, created 10 new hospitals using the same methodology and principles. He even employed ex-patients to work in the new hospitals, as they were thought to be more unlikely to use inhuman treatments, and they were also more able to cope with threats, complaints and pleas. Not even I had thought about that. Alright Pinel, but my case was much more radical. I am William Tuke, and in 1796, together with my fellow Quakers, we founded the York Retreat in northern England. Here we had about 30 patients. Living in a small community, we would rest, talk, and do some manual work. I rejected all medical theories and techniques and decided to minimize physical restraints to cultivate moral strength and rationality. We gave attention to individual differences. It was what we called the compassionate treatment, and we gave opportunities for social interaction to all our patients, including some types of physical therapy, such as music and different kinds of baths. What I liked the most was that in our institution we had regular tea parties in which patients could readapt themselves into the pleasures of social decorum and thereby gain a stronger sense of self. Our method was so famous and successful, it was copied, publicized and replicated around the world, even in the United States. However, it didn't last long because people thought that it was too expensive to give this personalized care that the patients, I thought, deserved. They didn't rely on non-medical treatment such as ours. However, we are considered to be a model for moral treatment of our patients. And other doctors did the same. The Italian Vincenzo Chirurgi removed the use of chains in his hospital, and Benjamin Rush from Philadelphia started using this toll-based approach to curing mentally ill people. So we can see that more enlightened and compassionate ways of perceiving and treating these patients were used. But after Chuck and Pinel's and others' efforts, the institutionalized new forms were as cruelly controlling as they were in the medieval ages, and physical treatment continued to be used, and this became even worse during the 20th century, as I already told you in the beginning of this video. So, our conclusion is that even if this Enlightenment, this humanitarian Big Bang did have a deep effect on the way we perceived and treated mentally sick people in Western countries in some cases, because at the end some of the patients were having tea or even trying to kill giants that we actually know that were windmills. The truth is that this impact was not long-lasting, because as Foucault said, modern man no longer communicates with a madman. There is no common language, or rather it no longer exists. The language of psychiatry, which is a monologue by reason about madness, could have only come into existence in such a silence.